OnlyFans textured, like ripped for her pleasure stuff. He probably used on a lady cow at some point. How can something so ugly taste so good? 欢迎来到刚好出餐前的喜剧派. I'm really fucking excited today. Because I get to make a dish from my hometown, which is not really from my hometown, because it's a Muslim dish, but the Muslims from my hometown. So anyways, pa. Yeah, pay attention. Pa. Listen to the pronunciation. Pa 口条. The word is actually pa, but because we're Hicks and we have a disgusting accent, it's pronounced pa, which is a word that we use to describe something a bit slower than a braise. We're gonna be making braised ox tongue. This dish is traditionally made by the Muslims of China. In my neighborhood, where the Muslims are historically wealthy, actually, they make a very generous version of the dish. By generous, I mean generosity of seasoning, generosity of process, generosity of ingredients, size of dish, all of it. Here are 2 ox tongues. That one is still warm. These are not imported, they're not European, these are Chinese tongues. Big, juicy Chinese cow. And you can tell by the dark color and the dryness that these are, they've never been vacuumed, never been frozen, they're fresh, and it's out of a cow that's had time to live and enjoy its life. He probably used this tongue on a lady cow at some point. And happy tongue tastes happier. So we're gonna use fresh ox tongue, never frozen. I have about 5.5 kilos of tongue here, and that's gonna go inside my pressure cooker bowl. Now, at this point, it's worth it to mention that everywhere else in the country where this dish shows up, nobody boils it with any ingredients, which brings me back to my point of generosity of process and ingredients. They usually just put it in water, they don't even bother salting it and get it cooked. That's what I would consider to be a cheap dick, broke ass way of making this dish. Where I'm from, in Shenyang, they actually braise the tongue first in a flavorful liquid and then re-braise it again in that same liquid, after which they reduce it and thicken it. So, garlic, shallots, and some garlic sprouts. All right, in she goes. And we're gonna top this up with water and let it rip. Not yet, not yet. It gets cooked first and then it gets sliced. Because if you slice it right now while it's raw and you cook it, it'll just curl up and look gross. You want it to lay flat on the plate and then we can arrange it and finish it later. And then what's gonna happen now is we go in with some spices. This is the point where everything looks very European, right? An allium in water and spices, right? This is a very European way to cook so far. Generally speaking, every single food culture has their version of putting meat into water, flavoring the water, and boiling the crap out of it. But like I said, generosity of ingredients, a lot of spices, a lot of flavorings. And we get to throw in some salt, because who doesn't like a good bit of salt? Now you want to be quite heavy-handed with the salt. Yeah, because you're flavoring the ox tongue. And on the lid goes. Quantum rice cookers. Perfect, cool. So we're gonna let it ride in the pressure cooker for about 40 minutes until it's fully cooked and slightly tender, at which point we're going to take them out, let it cool to room temperature, and make the flavorings for our sauce, and we can finish this dish. This is a very, very easy recipe. Generally speaking, if you had to make me make shit up, as far as numbers and weights and measures is concerned, what I would aim for is about 5% salinity in the water solution for this cook. So if you have a kilo of ox tongue, I would put a kilo of water and then 100 grams of salt. And then spices are up to you. I used star anise, cinnamon. I don't like bay leaf in this context, so I didn't put any in there. And I used a lot of Szechuan peppercorn. See you in about 40 minutes, half an hour, until the tongue goes half tender. Yeah?
A few moments later.
All right, 30-ish minutes later, I do believe that we are pretty much done. Time to open up the meaty nightclub. I hate this thing, so there we go. Yeah. You really have to try hard to fuck this up. Like alliums, beef, lots of star anise and Szechuan peppercorns. Like, how can this taste bad? All right, there you go. Yeah, kind of, yeah. Tongue is awful, I would say so. Look at this big ugly thing. How can something so ugly taste so good? I recommend that you undress your tongue while it's still piping hot. The more it cools down, the more difficult it will be. That being said, if you have a particularly sharp vegetable peeler, you can use that when it's cool. It just depends on you. All this bad dragon looking OnlyFans textured, like ribbed for her pleasure stuff has to go away. Braised tongue is pretty much popular everywhere where there have ever been broke people that belong to an Abrahamic religion. The Jews eat ox tongue, the Muslims eat ox tongue. Like, this is just a very typical thing that you would do with the cow once you've sold off the more expensive bits. Now? Or historically? Historically, no. Historically, if you're rich, you don't eat the ox tongue, but that's the same with any part of the animal, right? We've touched on this before. In Asia, we don't attach certain textures and certain parts of the animal with being broke as much as Europe. Like for us, we don't really have the concept of, oh, like high on the hog is better on the hog, right? Every part of the hog is usable. In Chinese food, at least, we use different parts of the animals for different applications. And the nature of the way that we process meat, i.e. in small chunks, means that the culture of having different parts of the animal mean different things doesn't exist that much. All right, this is usually where I start losing my patience, but feel free to be even more, fastidious than this with your trimming. But this is where about I will be like, fuck it, no one's gonna taste the difference. Because remember, you're slicing this into thin pieces anyways, so it doesn't really matter that much. You can save this for stock if you want to, but it is offal, so it does taste a bit funky. So it's up to you if you want to. Anyways, get it down like this, at which point you can start cooling it down, and then afterwards we'll slice it and I'll teach you how to make the sauce.
2,000 years later.
All right, unfortunately, same day yesterday, we didn't actually have time to finish this dish, so you join me the next day. And I'm just here prepping up the final ingredients for the sauce. After it cooled to room temperature, I threw it in the fridge and just kept it for a while. And I ended up with these two products. So, this one has had the outer grossness removed, which is the leathery outside, but the textured inside layer is still here. I just wanted to show you that, as you can see, I can break it up with my fingernails, which means that it's actually not that hard to eat. And as you can see here, because of the nice square edges, some of my colleagues have already helped themselves to my tongue, but they were kind enough to leave me just the center cut section.
我们昨天偷偷的吃了2口，其实味道已经很好了，所以现在是还要再加东西吗？
Why am I still flavoring it?
对，因为已经
Because
很好吃了。
pa is braise, but it can also mean to finish with a thick sauce.
Okay.
So usually pa肉条 doesn't show up without a nice thickened sauce on top.
Okay.
So at this point, this is immediately familiar to any Jew who's been in a Jewish deli or a Jewish restaurant. Braised tongue, cooled down, sliced thin like charcuterie. From here, the Chinese Muslim dish influence is the pa, which is the thickened cornstarch soy sauce on top. Yeah? That's what really makes this Chinese, which is kind of weird because you can then argue that anything with a thick, jizzy layer of soy sauce on top becomes then Chinese.
Okay.
Right? So anyways, on my board, I have garlic, I have chopped whites of Chinese leek. You want this to be a rough chop because where I'm from, raw garlic and raw leek is a flavor profile and a texture. It is part of the dish. If this bothers you, feel free to chop it finer and cook it beforehand. I'll let you know what I mean by that in a second. But for my purposes, they will be rough chopped. We'll use them to finish. We use these ingredients much like the Italians would finish with parsley or basil. We use alliums to finish. We want that raw, spicy, punch you on both sides of your face in the stomach kind of flavor. And over here, I have my cilantro. Remember, these are all going to be used as a finisher / garnish. So you want a nice, big, generous bunch, and you want it to be roughly chopped. Nothing too fine, yeah? Roughly chopped, just like this. And you have a nice wok over here. Feel free to do this in a pan if you so wish. It's not important that this is a wok. All right, let's get my ingredients. That's a lot of aromatic. At this point, I have my tongue, which needs to be sliced and arranged before we make the sauce. Once again, having said all this, feel free to skip any step that you feel isn't necessary to this dish tasting good. This slicing and arranging bit really isn't all that important. Slice it as thick or as thin as you like. Traditionally speaking, it would be 1/2 centimeter slices or 1/4 inch. 6/16 is 3/8 is 10 millimeters, which is 1 centimeter. 1 1/2 inches or 3/16 of an inch is what you want to be aiming for here.
他说猪舌是不是也可以这样做？差不多吧。
I mean, yes, but then it won't be for the Muslims. I feel like the Muslims and the Jews can't agree on much, but I feel like they should agree on not eating the pig version of this dish.
Yeah.
Now, grab a flat plate of your choice and we can start arranging.
就你拍它那个肉，其实它侧面很像肉，但它嚼起来其实完全跟肉不一样，就是很糯、很胶质的那种。
Yeah, I mean, this is just offal, right? You can also do this dish with heart if you want. Remember, where I'm from, this is almost like we have this at breakfast sometimes. Yeah, that's why we look different from Shanghainese people. Feel free to ask me why I have to do this, by the way. You're not going to? Why do you have to arrange it on the plate, Cadence? Oh, it's because later we want to build the sauce first and then slide the meat in, undisturbed, so that later we can re-slide it out. You're essentially pre-plating this dish. A lot of Chinese food is plated like this. They pre-plate the protein, make the sauce, slide it in, heat it up, and then replace it in the dish afterward.
Is that a must-have?
No, once again, you can just throw it all into a pile if you want to, but I rarely ever make this dish and I miss home, so we might as well. There we go, pack it down, nice and circular. All right, that was roughly half of 1 tub. This dish will feed a lot of people. So I recommend that you learn this for your repertoire for any weeknight meal. Think about it. If you have a pressure cooker, this takes an hour. If you don't, start it in the morning, go to work, and come back to finish later at night. All you're doing is salt, some spices, water, and ox tongue, boil until it's tender, at which point you peel the skin off as thoroughly or unthoroughly as you wish. And for you to finish this dish from head to toe is about 5 minutes. 10 minutes top if you're slow and white and have no good burners in the home. My pan goes on a medium-ish, low-ish heat. A little bit of oil. Shit, I said I wouldn't use sesame oil. It doesn't matter, it's gonna taste fine. A little bit of fat in the pan. You want your wok to be moistened with absolutely no extra fat, yeah? So, this is how much fat we want inside our pan. At which point we go in with our Szechuan peppercorns. About that much. All right. You want to toast them till they're about that color. At which point, you want to get rid of them. You're just using it to flavor the oil and that's it. You can leave them in there, but Northerners are not known for their ability to handle spicy and molesty flavors. We don't like mouth molest flavors like spicy and ma, like Szechuan peppercorn, that numbness. So we just flavor the oil gently and throw it away. Some people like biting into a Szechuan peppercorn and not being able to taste for the rest of their day. I am not one of those people. In that medium hot oil then goes a little bit of your leeks and a little bit of your garlic. Remember, you want most of this to be raw, yeah? This dish doesn't need a lot of fat because remember, there already is a lot of fat in this dish, yeah, from the top. And a little bit of cooking wine, Chinese cooking wine. If you don't have it, you can use like any rice wine of your choice. Failing that, you can try it with vermouth. It might be gross, but you know, up to you. And over here, entirely up to you. But I don't think that this dish would be complete without a little bit of cumin. A little bit's enough. Now in goes soy sauce. All right. Now, a little bit of your original braising liquor, because there's no point in wasting this. Remember, that is intensely salty from the cook. We added a lot of salt, right? So you're going to then let it down with an equal portion of water. All right, we're gonna cook this out a little bit. Before that heats up, this is my habit. A lot of people like to do this with cold water. I like to do it with already flavored liquid. I don't like adding extra water into my sauce. In goes your cornstarch. And you just finger it a little bit. Gross. And cook it till it thickens up. This is the exact texture you want, yeah? This is the texture we want in the final dish, which means that right now, it's a good time to add another half ladle of water. Reason being, we need to slide our ox tongue in and reheat it. Till your wok, if you're using a wok, and then just, wow. Now, this right here is pa.
Uh-huh.
This is what we mean by pa.
Oh.
one little bubble every now and again showing up. It's not a very hard cook, all right? It's just enough to heat your meat through, sauce your dish, and season it. And then in goes our raw garlic, our raw leeks, and we finish with a little bit of raw cilantro. Raw, just raw everything. All right, now when your meat has heated through, you want to crank the temperature up a little bit so as it starts boiling, the meat starts floating, which means that I can slide it out onto your dish. And you have perfectly arranged ox tongue. This is also the perfect time for me to demonstrate to you why in Chinese food photos, unlike Western food photos, there's always some guy raping your food with a chopstick, because that looks gross. All right, this is the only pair of real chopsticks in the entire restaurant.
Okay.
Vince, these are Vincent's personal chopsticks.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Remember when we did the Laufe episode? Like when we put Tung Yang Sua inside of peanut oil, Cantonese people started flying around. Yeah, like we just put leeks and garlic, and Northerners just arrive. Here you go, Mom. All right, let's get you a piece of ox tongue. Say ah. Ah. Mr. Chen, do you want a northern food?
Yes.
来，是吧？是吧？No? That's exactly the effect I wanted. I hope that that wasn't too hard for you to manage or too hard for you to get your heads wrapped around. As far as I'm concerned, it's a very, very easy dish that anyone can do at home, right? It's like 5-6 extra steps: salt, spices, and ox tongue. Chinese food is, like I said, one of the highest essentially like effort to reward foods out there. And of course, feel free to let me know in the comment section below if you want more cooking steps, more precise, or just more conceptual. And let me know what other foods you want to see, if you're even watching at all. Comment, like, subscribe, all that typical stuff. And I'll catch you guys for the next one. Take care.